They said to tell Michael, please give some TLC to the PYTs.
That's the 40th US President, Ronald Reagan, and pop superstar, Michael Jackson. But not that Michael Jackson, at least not yet.
Don't treat me like a criminal, because I am innocent.
The year was 1984 when Michael was at the peak of his career. But Michael wasn't meeting with Reagan just because he was a global superstar. No, this seemingly serendipitous meeting is all part of a timeline on how the US drinking age was raised across the board to 21, creating not only a pseudo-prohibition on partying for college kids across the nation, but widening the gap of cultural attitudes on drinking from the US to Europe, where countries like Germany allow kids as young as 14 to enjoy a beer or a glass of wine. And you know, since we're actually wrapping up Oktoberfest season right now, I feel like the subject is actually quite timely. Why is the national drinking age so much higher in the United States than it is in Europe? Because it didn't always used to be this way. And at the end of the day, does that higher national drinking age actually make a difference when it comes to responsible drinking? And the answer to this question I actually think is going to surprise quite a few of you. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive right in. So let's go ahead and start with a seemingly straightforward question. Which country in Europe has the lowest drinking age? Well, it's actually kind of a bit of a trick question because several European countries actually have no formal laws on what age people are allowed to consume alcoholic beverages. And in Germany, Greece, the Netherlands, and Portugal, the minimum age requirement for alcohol consumption only actually relates to public spaces like bars or restaurants or at Oktoberfest, for example. In fact, 11 member states don't impose any age requirements for the consumption of alcohol in their national legal frameworks. So instead of setting limits on who can consume beverages, many of these countries simply just limit the age on which you can purchase it. The minimum age to purchase alcohol in Cyprus and Malta is 17 years. In Luxembourg, it's 16 years, and in Austria, purchasing alcohol is regulated at the national level. There are two different age requirements, either 16 or 18, depending on the region and the percentage of alcohol involved. And for example, in the country where I currently live, in Germany, this age requirement thing actually gets even trickier. We do have something called the Youth Protection Act, and it principally differentiates between children, those up to 14, and teens, between the ages of 14 and 18, who are considered minors, and adults, of course, who are 18 years and older. Children under the age of 14 are not allowed to buy or drink alcohol. Teens who are 14 or 15 are allowed to drink beer, wine, or sparkling wine, but only in the presence and with the permission of their parents or another person in a custodial role. Other heavy alcoholic drinks are strictly not allowed. Adolescents aged 16 and over are actually allowed to both buy and drink beer, wine, or sparkling wine, also in the absence of their parents. But again, other heavy alcoholic drinks are usually not allowed to them either. So yeah, it gets complicated, but generally speaking, parental guidance is the default. But that doesn't necessarily mean that countries don't have other ways that they don't still simultaneously discourage drinking either. For example, the Scandinavian countries, which, with the exception of Denmark, have government-run liquor stores to further control supply. Not to mention the fact that alcohol can actually be extremely expensive in these countries, which of course further acts as a deterrent. And I can speak to this from some personal experience because Jonathan and I actually got married in Iceland and spent our honeymoon there. And one of the curious quirks of Iceland is that even the locals will commonly buy alcohol at the duty-free shop at the airport in Reykjavik, because otherwise more than 80% of the price of a bottle of vodka is just tax. Yeah, it's one of the big reasons why Iceland actually has one of the lowest overall alcohol consumptions in all of the European Union. And Needless to say, it was another reason why we racked up a pretty hefty bar tab during our time there. But cultural attitudes surrounding drinking aren't just limited to the age at which you can purchase and consume it. Europeans also have a much more relaxed attitude about where you can drink as well. In quite a few countries throughout Europe, enjoying a beer or a glass of wine in public is allowed, but with some adding in restrictions either based on location or on the type of container you are drinking out of. You know, I've said this before, Europe is not a monolith, but interestingly, due to things like globalization, the drinking habits of those living within the respective EU member countries has actually become more similar over time. In the past, where we used to be able to describe countries in Europe as having either wet or dry cultures, research actually has been showing for some time now that those cultural distinctions are actually becoming less and less significant. So yeah, taking all of this together, Europe doesn't just have a more relaxed attitude overall when it comes to drinking, but generally speaking, a much lower legal age limit in order to consume it in the first place, which in comparison to the United States at 21 is actually one of the highest in the world. So I think it's good that for the next section, we actually take a look at how exactly the United States became such an outlier.
It is that with freedom must come responsibility. Some of our citizens have been acting irresponsibly.
Despite the minimum age being 21 across the nation, the legal drinking age is actually set by the individual 50 states. They just all happen to currently agree. But it actually didn't always used to be this way. In fact, the United States actually kind of used to look a whole lot like Europe. Go back to 1975, and the legal drinking age in the US was a hodgepodge of standards. Some were 18, some were 19. Delaware was a standout with a minimum age of 20, and some were 21 and older. But many often had allowances for drinks with lower alcohol content and stuff like beer and wine. So how did we get from this to this? Well, it's actually a pretty fascinating story of contradictions, a curious tale of how a famously small government is better government president strong-armed the states by essentially blackmailing them with federal tax dollars, and how ultimately Michael Jackson ended up shaking hands with Reagan dressed like a disco leader of the marching band at the White House. And it's why children of the 80s and 90s, like me, grew up with strong memories of public school assemblies where we were not just told, don't drink, but we were actually shown giant posters of graphic images of drunk driving victims. Now, don't get me wrong, for sure, America's relationship with alcohol goes back way further than the 1970s and 80s, and quite frankly, is probably actually tied to the very founding of our nation in the first place. In fact, political and social movements that called for abstinence from alcohol consumption date back to the colonial era. But it was in the late 19th century when the cause for temperance gained the national spotlight, ultimately culminating with the 18th Amendment to the US Constitution, Prohibition in 1920. Although it was eventually repealed with the 21st Amendment in 1933. By the late 1960s, however, the vast majority of US states had settled on a 21 and older drinking minimum.
We are certifying the 26th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States.
But fast forward to the 70s, and the 26th Amendment actually changed that dynamic again. You see, 18-year-olds now had a lot of responsibilities and risks of older Americans. They could now vote and be drafted into the Vietnam War. So a lot of states thought that it was only fair that they also be allowed to drink legally. But that didn't last very long.
More than 100 youngsters a month will have their lives saved.
Advocates for drinking age reform quickly cited that states with lower drinking ages were correlated with increases in drinking-related fatalities. And they also argued that young adults who would cross state lines in order to purchase alcohol from states with a lower age limit also increased instances of drunk driving. By the mid-1980s, more and more states were slowly raising their drinking ages, due in part to an awareness campaign. That clip from the beginning of this video was Michael Jackson being honored for letting his music be used in anti-drunk driving PSAs.
You're as good as dead.
But the tactics used by Reagan weren't just limited to flashy PR with global superstars. And this next part is actually really important because love him or hate him, Reagan is known for his staunch Republican value of small government is better government.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
And that position makes what he does next quite curious.
So I want you to know that I've decided to support legislation to withhold 5% of a state's highway funds if it does not enact the 21-year-old drinking age.
But wait a second, didn't Reagan say this?
It isn't up to a big and overwhelming government in Washington to tell the states what to do.
Yeah, but he also followed it up with this.
And you're partly right. But the thing is, this problem is much more than a state problem.
So wait, what in the heck does this have to do with highway funding exactly?
It's a national tragedy involving transit across state borders.
Well, the International Highway Act of 1956 created a network of roads, largely funded with federal dollars, that connected all of the major cities across the United States. As you can imagine, their creation radically changed the American landscape, both physically and economically. But they also became a mechanism by which the federal government could influence the states to do what they wanted. In a way, Reagan could effectively strong-arm the states, blackmailing them with reduced funding that their state economies relied on in order to push through his agenda. And so, not so surprisingly, the law passed. And although it didn't outright raise the legal drinking age limit, it effectively did so. But see that woman standing next to Reagan? Well, President Reagan's strategy was influenced in part by an organization that you're probably pretty familiar with if you were a millennial American kid like me. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or MADD, is a nonprofit organization that was founded with two primary goals: to strengthen the penalties for those caught drunk driving and to raise the legal age limit in order to curb drunk driving. The organization was founded on September 5th, 1980 by Candace, or Candy Lightner, after her 13-year-old daughter Carrie was killed by a drunk driver. Yeah, the same woman from the signing ceremony. When her daughter lost her life, drunk driving was a crime, but it wasn't considered a felony. Yeah, things were a lot different just 40 years ago. And the awareness and advocacy that her organization has generated around drunk driving is commendable, to say the least. MADD was, and still is, a pretty big influence in American public school education. It's been decades, and I can still picture the school assemblies that they hosted at my elementary, middle, and high school, often with, again, pretty graphic depictions that would pretty much just scare you into abstinence. And that word, abstinence, is actually really important because I think if you really want to understand American culture, abstinence has always been kind of a cornerstone of our approach when dealing with anything that society deems to be morally questionable, but also illegal, right? We tend to take the approach of just say no, instead of equipping young adults with the responsibility and the know-how on how to navigate these things in a, responsible manner with some level of protection. And when it comes to alcohol, you see this on their slogan: no alcohol, no drugs, no victims. And listen, I'm not here today to actually debate that particular position, but I do bring it up because I think it is extremely important if you want to really understand the fundamental cultural attitudes around drinking when it comes to the United States and Europe, because there is quite a strong difference there. One preaches abstinence to young adults, and the other does try to foster some level of responsible protection. And I think what I was ultimately wanting to understand was not just the cultural difference, but what does this ultimately mean when it comes to responsible drinking even later on in life? And that question was fascinating.
Thanks. I needed that.
I am 11.
One of the most common arguments against America's legal drinking age limit is that Europe has a supposedly safer drinking culture despite its lower drinking ages. But is it really? There's a prevailing stereotype, and it's a pretty strong one, that is certainly perpetuated by Hollywood. Since American kids aren't allowed to drink, when they find themselves in partying situations, like frat parties at university, they often binge drink to excess.
We're going streaking! Yes!
Nope, no personal experience there whatsoever. Anyway, but this looks like it's probably a myth. According to international data from the World Health Organization, European teens aged 15 to 19 tend to report greater levels of binge drinking than American teens. And this was also supported by a study conducted by an alcohol policy expert at Johns Hopkins University, who studied survey data and found that 15 and 16-year-old Americans are actually less likely to report drinking and getting drunk in the past month than their counterparts in most European countries. But interestingly, this is actually a trend that continues into adulthood as well. Total alcohol consumption per person is much higher in most of Europe. Drinkers in several European countries, including the UK, France, Belgium, Denmark, Sweden, and Iceland, yes, even Iceland, are also more likely to report binge drinking than their US counterparts. But there are going to be some different motivations behind this binge drinking. For example, one study suggests that Icelanders' binge drinking might actually be a product of high alcohol prices. Icelandic partiers are going to be more likely to drink at home or pre-game to get their buzz going for cheaper before heading out to the bars where they'll only enjoy a drink or two. And understanding these seemingly small nuances are actually incredibly important if you want to understand what's actually going on behind the data, particularly when it comes to things like drunk driving and any sort of international comparison. For example, you might read a spicy headline that goes something like this: Americans are more than 3 times as likely to die due to drunk driving than Germans. And yeah, on face value, that would be true. The United States percentage of road fatalities caused by drinking was sizable, 31% in 2019, compared to just 9% in Germany. It would certainly give off the idea that Americans are reckless drivers, but you would also be missing out on a heck of a lot of context here. For starters, Germany has a much more robust public transit network. In most localities, you don't need to have a car to get home safely from the bars. Even in the smaller rural village that we moved to, we still have buses and trains that run every 30 minutes through the night from Freiburg to get you back home safely. And yeah, the US does have Uber, but try hailing one of those at any small to medium rural podunk town, and yeah, you're gonna come up short most of the time. And in Germany, remember, the country where you can buy and drink beer at 16 has a legal driving age of 18, which means you have 2 full years to learn your drinking limits before ever being considered responsible enough to drive a vehicle. And that's beside the fact that getting a driver's license in the first place is far more difficult to achieve in Germany, which means that 1, not as many young people have one, and 2, if you do have one, you're probably not gonna risk losing it. And so all of this kind of begs the question, do Europeans actually handle their drinking better? Or do they simply just have greater safety nets to keep people from drunk driving and maybe harsher penalties to reprimand those who break the rules? Yeah, probably. Because the other missing factor in a lot of these analyses is that how we quantify drunkenness isn't even the same in every country. For example, the average worldwide BAC, or blood alcohol content level, is 0.06. In Europe, the average is lower at 0.05. But in contrast, the United States sits at 0.08, which is 60% above the European limit. And you can actually interpret this data in one of two very different ways. On the one hand, the fact that the DUI limit is so much higher in America could actually potentially skew the numbers towards Europe because, for example, if you got behind the wheel with a blood alcohol content level of 0.07 in Germany, that would be considered illegal, and you would be contributing to DUI statistics. But in the United States, it's totally legal, and if you were pulled over and tested, you wouldn't actually be breaking any law. But on the other hand, you could also interpret the data to mean the exact opposite. You could also interpret this data to say that by having a more strict definition of impaired driving, drivers are less likely to risk getting behind the wheel in the first place, thereby lowering the overall DUI rates, which, yes, studies do support. Yeah, it's complicated. And all of these studies are relative. And a lot of the time, the very question you ask in the first place is going to give you wildly different results when trying to fully understand which countries are more responsible than others when it comes to drinking. And let me give you one final example. In 2021, the Global Drug Survey reported that among the 22 countries examined, Australia, Denmark, Finland, and the United States, in that order, self-reported the most frequent incidents per year of getting drunk. However, change that question from how often are you drunk to just simply how often do you drink, and the results you get are wildly different. In this category, France took the top spot with 132 days of alcohol consumption per year, or around 3 drinks a week. New Zealand followed with 120 days and the Netherlands with 112 days. On average, respondents from the United States drank just 83 days of the year, around 2 times a week. And this was actually slightly lower than the global average of 101 drinks per year. And listen, this is just my opinion, but I would wager that our perception of one culture being more or less responsible than the other when it comes to drinking is probably heavily skewed. For example, if you're a European person watching this video, when are you most likely to see an American drinking? Well, probably when they're on vacation, which is when all of us usually tend to partake in libations a little bit more than usual, right? Or maybe you see it happening on television, but I think all of us can probably agree that Hollywood isn't exactly accurate all the time. But the same is true vice versa, right? I think Americans probably see Europeans drinking more often in that sort of vacation setting, and that tends to maybe skew our perceptions of who drinks more and who's more responsible with it. But that actually brings me to the final question of this video, which is that I think we have a really cool international audience of these videos going on recently, and I would love to hear from you on what your perceptions are, not just of other countries' drinking habits, but of your own. How do you feel like your country ranks overall, whether that's in how often you drink or how responsible you are? And ultimately, how do you feel about where we should be setting the legal age to consume alcohol and striking that balance between consumption and responsible behavior, coinciding together? Because I think we have a myriad of tools: raising or lowering the driving age, raising or lowering the drinking age, raising or lowering the legal limit of blood alcohol content that's allowed to get behind the wheel, or even just taxing alcohol. And again, trying to strike this balance is something that every country deals with. I don't think there's one right or wrong way to approach it, but I would love to hear from you down in the comments below. So please let me know. And as always, I look forward to hearing from you. And if you enjoyed what you saw today, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button. It means a lot. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you next Sunday. Tschüss!